Shabbat Shalom, everybody. James Trim here, and today I want to talk to you about Shabbat do's and don'ts. What's permitted on Shabbat, what's prohibited on Shabbat, and then what's permitted on Shabbat. Before we get started, I want to ask everybody to please donate to support this work. Some of you, by the way, have asked how have things turned out. I am in the new study in our new home, and we, for many of you may know from a previous video, that we lost our home where we had been living for 7 years, and the REAP that we'd been renting from decided that they had apparently decided that they wanted to sell the home. And in fact, it appears, we don't know for sure, but it appears that the decision to sell the home had actually been made over a year ago, before we signed our last lease on the property. And we had a very short time to find somewhere else to live, and there were great expenses involved, and we are still paying some of those expenses. We are still now paying some double bills for utilities for a period of time that we had to have both be paying utilities on both homes, because we had to have some time to move things, and there were substantial expenses involved in moving, and our rent has now gone up because there's just no way we're going to get the deal that we got where we were before. So for those that don't know, my wife is chronically ill. She's disabled, and I am her caretaker. So she suffers from chronic pain, and as I said, I'm her caretaker. So if you would like to help us out, also help make these videos possible, and the blogs that I do online, all the teaching that I do online, make that possible. Please donate to support this work. You can do that by sending donations by PayPal to donations@wnae.org, or by clicking on the donate link in the video description. Also, don't forget to like these videos. Don't forget to click to subscribe to the video and click the notification bell, so you'll get notifications when new videos come out. Don't forget to comment in the comment section. Let us know what you think of the videos, and don't forget to participate in those discussions. All these things helps YouTube's algorithm decide which videos to recommend to new viewers, and we want to get recommended to new viewers. Okay, a lot of people getting involved in the Torah walk is particularly one of the big things is that, of course, they start keeping Shabbat. And that raises some obvious questions, like what constitutes work? What is work? What am I not supposed to do on Shabbat? You know, one man's work is another man's pleasure. And so one person, gardening is their hobby. They love to garden. Me, I hate that stuff. I don't want to do that. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that, if I like to garden, I can do that on Shabbat. There are a number of, maybe somebody's things they like to jog. Well, jogging, is that work? Is that permitted on Shabbat? And so on. So what constitutes work? And some people will, when they get into the Torah walk, they'll light upon this word servile work, that somehow creates some special category of work that's not permitted. That's really only a feature of the English translation. That does not have anything to do with what the word work in the Hebrew actually means. So the Torah does give us a couple of insights into the word work right off the bat. Those are, one, preparation and cooking of food, Leviticus 23:3 Exodus 34:21, and Exodus 16:21 through 30, among others. No, actually, that's it for those three, for cooking a food. Kindling a fire, Exodus 35:3. Now that's a very important one that people will also try and redefine, that it means a work fire or some special kind of fire. It doesn't. In fact, the Hebrew word here, if you look it up and you study it, the word here means literally to cause. It's a causative verb in Hebrew. It means to cause something to happen, and it literally means to cause something to burn, to cause combustion. Okay? It doesn't just mean starting a fire. It also means maintaining a fire, adding fuel to a fire, because if I put another log on the fire that was already started, then when I put another log on the fire, I'm causing that log to burn. So it means I don't add fuel to a fire. Causing something to burn also means starting an internal combustion engine, pressing the accelerator and adding fuel to an internal combustion engine, opening the throttle on an internal combustion engine. These are all things that cause something to burn. They are directly prohibited by the plain, simple text of the Torah. Okay. Jeremiah chapter 17 verses 21 through 22 also give us carrying anything out of a domain as being prohibited on Shabbat. Now, Jeremiah doesn't get to create Torah. Jeremiah was a prophet, and as such he was bound by the commandment not to add to or take from the Torah. However, as a prophet, he was in a position to elaborate on Torah and to admonish the people to observe Torah and to help them understand what it means. So when he talks about carrying something out in Jeremiah 17:21 through 22, he is elaborating. He's telling them an example of what work means. There's also a really good clue as to what the word work means in Exodus 31. Exodus, or Shemot 31, verses 1 through 11 have to do with the work of building the tabernacle. Elohim is addressing the workers that were going to build the tabernacle, the craftsmen, etc. Immediately following this, in verses 12 through 18, there's an admonishment to observe the Shabbat. Okay, now why does this the book of Exodus suddenly shift like a hard right turn from building the tabernacle to observing the Shabbat? And the answer is because the Torah is reminding the builders of the tabernacle not to forget to rest on Shabbat. And the word for work in Exodus 31:3, or for workmanship, is a form of the same word that is used for work in verses 12 through 18, in telling us not to forget to rest from Shabbat, not to forget to rest from work on Shabbat. In other words, the word work, the word is melikah. Melikah means work. Okay, that's the word. It's used there. And it's used in both passages, in Exodus 3 and in 12 through 17. And therefore, we can understand, this is very important, this is, Elohim doesn't do things by accident. This was done on purpose so that we would then see that the building of the tabernacle, the things that were done, the work that was done in order to build the tabernacle, were examples of work that we're not to do on Shabbat. Logical, right? Okay, so in the Mishna, we actually have a list preserved for us of 39 categories. This is in Mishna Shabbat 7:2 of 39 categories of work that are prohibited on Shabbat. These are 39 categories of things that were involved in building the tabernacle, and therefore 39 categories of things that would constitute work that we're not supposed to do on Shabbat. These are sowing, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing wool, bleaching, hackling, dyeing, spinning, stretching the threads, making of two meshes, weaving two threads, dividing two threads, tying and untying knots, sewing two stitches, tearing in order to sew two stitches, capturing a deer, slaughtering, flaying, salting it, curing its hide, scraping it of its hair, cutting it up, writing two letters, erasing in order to write two letters over where you erased, building, pulling down, extinguishing, kindling, striking with a hammer, carrying out from one domain to another, which is what Jeremiah mentions. These are the 39 categories of things that are not permitted to be done on Shabbat. And for those who want to do more study, in the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat, pages 73a through 75b, there's analysis of these 39 categories of work, and there are specific instances, specific examples of those 39 categories, breaking them down into more specific elements that are prohibited on Shabbat. The other thing that we're told not to do on Shabbat is in Exodus chapter 16 verse 29, not to go out of your place on Shabbat. And this raises the question, what does place mean? When Moshe gave the Torah, came down from Mount Sinai and gave the Torah to the people, somebody on the front row raises their hand and says, Moshe, what does it mean not to go out of my place on Shabbat? Does that mean if I'm in the latrine when Shabbat starts, I can't come in? I have to stay in the latrine all through Shabbat? Does it mean if I'm in my home in Shabbat and I've got to go to the latrine, I have to hold it until Shabbat is done before I can go out to the latrine? What does it mean to not go out of one's place on Shabbat? What constitutes a place? So when that happened, Moshe did not shrug his shoulders and say, heck if I know. Because Moshe spent 40 days on Mount Sinai learning the Torah from Elohim. Now you can take an audio file of the 5 books of the Torah and play it out, and it will not take you anywhere near 40 days. So Moshe received a whole lot more information over that 40-day period than we have in the written Torah. One of the things he would have received is, what is place? Our forefathers knew what it meant, because Moshe told the guy in the front row who raised his hand and had asked, and of course the people had to know. In order to keep it, they had to know what it meant. And they told their children, and they told their children, and they told their children, and our fathers told us. And of course, our forefathers wrote it also in the Mishna. So in the Mishna, in Eruvin 4:3, it says, he who went forth on Shabbat on a permissible mission, obviously you couldn't go do something that was itself a Sabbath violation, but something that you were permitted to go do. But they said to him, the mission has already been completed, has 2,000 cubits in every direction in which to travel. Okay, actually, let me elaborate. What this case means in this case is he goes to go do something and he finds out that something that was permitted because somebody was hurt. He was a doctor. Somebody was hurt. He had to go. Finds out on his way, there's nobody hurt anymore. How far can he travel? Okay. At any rate, what is the travel limit on Shabbat? And in Mishna Eruvin 4:3, we learn that it's 2,000 cubits in every direction. The Essenes, however, only allowed travel of 1,000 cubits unless one is following an animal to graze it, in which case they are allowed 2,000 cubits. And this is something that we find in the Damascus document in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, where do we get this 2,000 cubits from? Or where did it come from? Well, when Israel was in the wilderness, in the camp in the wilderness, the camp had a radius of 2,000 cubits in all directions. This is according to Mishna Rosh Hashanah 2:5. The place outside the camp is the place where the offering of the red heifer was made. That was the place right outside that camp. And in the first and second temple eras, that place was on the Mount of Olives, according to Mishna Midot 1:3. So, when we read in Acts chapter 1, verse 12, then returned they on to Jerusalem, from the Mount of Olives, which is from Jerusalem a Sabbath day's journey, Acts 1:12. This is in complete agreement with the Mishnah, and it tells us that the distance from Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives, or the distance from Jerusalem to the place outside the camp, is 2,000. Was a Sabbath day's journey. We know that was also 2,000 cubits, and it was the distance that was that was permitted to travel on Shabbat. So we see then that the Nazarene halacha, expressed in Acts chapter 1, verse 12, agrees with the same halacha that we see in the Mishnah as to the limit that one's permitted to travel on Shabbat. So now we have what constitutes work and what the limit of travel is on Shabbat. I don't remember if I covered this or not, but if I didn't, the mitzvah against causing something to burn on Shabbat includes running an internal combustion engine, which would mean no driving, which would fit also into travel limits on Shabbat. So you're walking, and you can walk 2,000 cubits. How much is 2,000 cubits, by the way? About 0.7 miles. So about 3/4 of a mile. Okay, so when is the Sabbath loosed? When is it permitted to do some of these things that would normally be Sabbath violations on Shabbat? When is it permitted to do work on the Shabbat? When is it permitted to travel further than 2,000 cubits on Shabbat? And Yeshua gives us an answer to this. It's a little bit different from the answer in Rabbinic Judaism. It's not radically different. Some of the details can be radically different, but some of the detailed instances can be very important. But Yeshua taught that it was permitted to do effectively a good deed on Shabbat, chesed. Chesed means loving kindness, mercy, grace. He teaches this in Matthew chapter 12, in fact, most of the chapter. But verses 5 through 7, have you not read in the Torah that the Kohanim profane the Sabbath of the temple and are blameless? And I tell you, there is greater than the temple. And if you had known what it means, for I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Here Yeshua is quoting Hosea 6:6, which reads, for I desire mercy, or chesed, and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of Elohim rather than all burnt offerings. So chesed outweighs the sacrifices. The sacrifices outweigh the Shabbat, such that chesed outweighs the Shabbat, and likewise, well, let's get to that in a minute. So we know the Sabbath is loosed to fulfill the sacrificial offerings. because the sacrificial offerings are permitted on Shabbat, even though that performance requires work, it requires causing things to burn, and yet there are Sabbath sacrifices that were performed in the temple. Okay, so the sacrifices outweigh the Sabbath. Chesed outweighs the sacrifices. Therefore, as a matter of simple logic, Chesed outweighs the Shabbat. That means that it's permitted to do good on the Shabbat. Now, the other half of Hosea 6:6, this is why it's so important to understand Yeshua's halachot, what argument he makes for his halachot, because there's so much that we can learn from this application of Hosea 6:6. For example, anything that is of greater weight than anything that outweighs anything that the sacrifices outweigh, the Shabbat also outweighs. Let's put it that way. We also learn that any act of chesed, of loving kindness, is permitted on Shabbat. Now, in Rabbinic Judaism, anything that is done to preserve human life, to save a human life, is permitted on Shabbat. But under Yeshua's halacha, a human life doesn't have to be at stake. Any act of loving kindness, that means any act of healing, of helping your fellow man. Now, that doesn't mean you should help them on the Shabbat when it could just as easily have been done on another day. The prime example that I like to give is that in Rabbinic Judaism, it's Erev Shabbat, there's a gathering at a Jewish home, and somehow the Shabbat candle gets knocked over and starts a fire on the drapes. And rather than put out the fire, which would violate Shabbat, if the situation is such that everyone can calmly and collectively file out of the home and stand across the street and watch it burn to the ground, then that is the halacha in Rabbinic Judaism. Whereas under Yeshua's halacha, it is an act of mercy and loving kindness to the family, owners of the home who are going to lose everything, to put out the fire. Immediately attempt to put out the fire, even though that would normally be a Sabbath violation. There can be many, many other examples of acts of loving kindness, acts of healing. Yeshua performed, for example, that where nobody's life was at stake, but they were healed of something that was not life-threatening, that would also be permitted on Shabbat under Yeshua's halacha. There is something else that we can learn, though, by then understanding Yeshua's halacha, the argument that he made, is that if we go back and we look at Hosea 6:6, we see that Hosea 6:6 is written in what we call poetic synonymous parallelism. Synonymous poetic parallelism. It's a form of Hebrew poetry where the same thing is stated twice. Synonymous statements appear in parallel sentence structure on parallel lines. Thought poetry, if you will. So the first statement is, "For I desire chesed, not sacrifice." And the second line says, "and the knowledge of Elohim rather than burnt offerings." So what we can say, since it says, "I desire chesed and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of Elohim rather than burnt offerings," whatever can be said of chesed, and what Yeshua has said of chesed, that it outweighs the Shabbat, can also be said of the knowledge of Elohim, because the burnt offerings are also the sacrifices that are done on Shabbat, are burnt offerings, that the burnt offerings outweigh the Shabbat, therefore the knowledge of Elohim outweighs the Shabbat, therefore studying Torah outweighs the Shabbat. That means it's permissible to drive on Shabbat for Torah study. It's permitted to do things that otherwise might be Sabbath violations in order to study Torah. And it's also permitted to travel further than the normal travel restrictions in order to study Torah. Okay. There's so much that we can learn from Yeshua's halakha and applying it in different ways. We are doing a Talmud class for anybody that is interested. Email me at cleartruth@yahoo.com, and if you're interested in joining our online Talmud class, and we'll see if we can get you involved in it if it's something you're interested in studying. Also, I want to ask everybody to please donate to support this work. You can do that by clicking on the donate link in the video description, and you can also do that by clicking on the notification. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little twisted up here. You can also do that by sending donations by PayPal to donations@wnae.org. Also, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, click that notification bell, there it is, and also let us know what you think in the comments about the video content, and you can also participate in the discussions in the comments, and all that helps the YouTube video algorithm decide which videos to recommend to new viewers. And of course, we want to be recommended to new viewers. Also, share these videos on your social media with your friends and in relevant Facebook groups, on Twitter, or X as it's called now, or any other social media that you participate in, or email them to your friends. Help get the word of these videos out. One last thing I want to say. Those that have asked, yes, we have landed on our feet in a new home, another home. It's not a new home, it's another home though. It's new to us. And it was quite a crisis. We did lose the home we've been living in for the last 7 years, and we did have to scramble to find a new place to live. And we did undergo a lot of additional expense to move. We are still covering the additional expenses, paying some of those out, and we are our rent went up, and we are facing rent that has to be paid in about 10 days, a little more than 10 days, and right now we don't have it. So please donate to help us out with that. For those that don't know, my wife is chronically ill. She is disabled, and I'm her caretaker. She also suffers from chronic pain. So do us a favor, help us out. You're also helping to make these videos possible. Some of the extra bills that we're facing right now, not only were there extremely high moving costs of moving everything we owned, cleaning up the old place, but there's also there was a period of time where we had to pay rent on both homes, and as a result of paying rent on both homes, we had, for overlap, so we had time to move, we have to cover the utility bills for 2 homes over that couple of week period, so we are bearing those extra expenses too. So please help us out if you possibly can. Any donation is bigger than no donation, and any donation will help. Until next time, everybody,